Welcome to the Church Vibes Podcast with Jordan and Mattie, the podcast where we talk about all things Christian, all things culture, and all things Christian culture. This is a space where we love having tough conversations. It's our hope that whether you're a dedicated follower of Christ, you've never stepped foot in a church or opened a Bible in your life, or you're anywhere in between, you'll be able to learn something new, think about something differently, or be encouraged in some small way. Now, on to the show.
Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Church Vibes Podcast.
Grace and peace, everybody. It's Mattie. Thanks for joining us for episode 1.
Woo, episode 1. Well, it's great to have you guys here, and I hope you made it through the first episode last week. If you did, thank you so much. We appreciate the support. We're just going to jump right into it. I think we've had a whole lot happen this week. And
Crazy week.
Oh my goodness. Well, Mattie, do you want to go ahead and take it away, I guess, and hit us with that first trending topic that we saw?
Yeah, so you guys listening may have heard of a little someone named Kanye West.
Might have heard of him.
Might have heard of him. Artist and 2020 presidential candidate Kanye West went on a Twitter rant this week, accused his wife, Kim Kardashian, you may have heard of her, of wanting to sell their 7-year-old daughter into sex trafficking and have her pose for Playboy. So some pretty serious accusations. And he accused his mother-in-law, Chris, of conspiring with his wife, Kim, to have him, quote-unquote, locked up. Since then, many of the tweets have been deleted, and he has since apologized. It's important to note here that Kanye West revealed in 2017 that he does suffer from bipolar disorder. And Kim made a public statement, really her first statement on his mental illness, where she referred to Kanye as a, quote, brilliant but complicated man, saying that those close to him know his heart. She really expressed how the family and friends of those with mental illness are often left feeling powerless to help them. And she ended her statement with an encouragement to fans and followers not to count Kanye out yet and to show compassion toward those actively dealing with mental illness, saying, quote, living with bipolar disorder does not diminish or invalidate his dreams and his creative ideas, no matter how big or unobtainable they may feel to some. That's part of his genius, and as we all have witnessed, many of his big dreams have come true. We as a society talk about giving grace to the issue of mental health as a whole. However, we should also give it to the individuals who are living with it in times when they need it the most, end quote. So, Jordan, this is kind of one of your passion areas, one of your areas of expertise. What
Definitely.
are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, first of all, we see that right before all this, Kanye had quite the breakdown on his first, I guess it was his first presidential campaign, or his first rally, I should say, where he kind of went off and really got emotional talking about how he himself was almost aborted, and it's just the whole thing. I'd encourage you just to go ahead and watch it. And that's also not the first time we've seen. So we've got the Twitter rant, we've got the presidential rally, and then we also saw the one of the most famous things way back in the day when he interrupted Taylor Swift, right?
Of course, yeah.
Right? And so we joke about that, but when we see the fact that he does have bipolar disorder, if he wasn't a celebrity, we would just see that as like a hurting and sick person.
Right.
And I think it's unfortunate that the more famous we get, the less grace we seem to have in the public eye. But I love that Kim, even after the whole, the rant and the accusations that he made of his wife, she still said
very serious accusations.
Oh yeah. And they're so serious and crazy that you can kind of just see that he was in a bipolar episode. We have bipolar has periods of manic and depressive states, and this is definitely a manic state that he was in. And I hope he's doing better. And usually that's triggered by some point of intense stress that brought out that. And so I just hope that whatever brought that on, he's doing okay with that too. And I think it's so easy to just jump and either, like in the case of the Grammys back then, to just joke about it, or to just criticize and demonize him. But just like all of us, he is a sick person. Just as much as we can have like a broken bone, or we can have a cold, we can also have a broken brain and or a brain that's sick and not doing super great. And it's an internal thing, so it's kind of harder to wrap our heads around, but that's the truth. I don't suffer with bipolar, but I have my own cornucopia of issues. And it's all the same. Like I just hope that people can have grace for me if I have some type of moment like that. And yeah, so I kind of hurt with him this, right now. Like, and
Yeah.
I certainly, I see a lot of jokes, but it is no laughing matter. And I hope it did say at another point that he doesn't like to take medication because it messes with his creativity. And
Very common with people with bipolar disorder.
yes. And I totally get that. Like, medication can really mess up with your head. Like, it's kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah, it might level you out, but then it also kind of kills all like like for example, like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. I'm on one where like, yeah, I don't have like the really low points, but I also don't have really high ones either. And I think we don't think about that. And so I don't blame him for not wanting to take his medication, but I really do think in this case, he needs to get on something. And just try to work through that creativity block that he's getting. But yeah, I could go on forever. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's really difficult to see because I hate to see any person struggling. And then
Yeah.
when you think of someone that's struggling so publicly, there's such a level of shame and humiliation that goes along with that, knowing that there are millions of people all around the world witnessing something. I mean, think about those times when you've just broken down, in emotion, and then imagine having millions of people witness that and having it saved on the internet for all eternity,
Oh, I can't imagine.
eternity, essentially. And I have a lot of respect for Kanye as an artist. I think we should address for any people that aren't aware, Kanye does profess faith in Jesus Christ. He does claim to be a Christian. He's come out with a really incredible Christian album and is supposed to be coming out with another one soon. My younger brother, Tom, has been a huge fan of his for years and years. And my mom, for probably the first several months after his album, Jesus is King, came out, she listened to it all the way through every single day. And it really ministered to her and really spoke to her. And so I really do have a lot of love and respect for Kanye, but I feel very sad for him because it seems to me, and I'd love to hear what your perspective is on this, as this is more your area. It seems to me that there are certain mental illnesses that have been glamorized in a sense, where every celebrity is like, I have anxiety, I have depression, all of this type of stuff, where it's seen as like this badge of honor of like, I have a mental illness. But if you get into things like bipolar disorder or super, super severe obsessive compulsive disorder or schizophrenia or borderline personality disorder, those stigmas are still there. And it's like the way that he is manifesting his struggle, it can't be glamorized, and so people don't know what to do with it.
That's good. Yeah. And that's totally it, right? Like if you hear, I don't know, that's just Justin Bieber. That's the first one that came to my mind. But like if we heard, oh man, Justin Bieber had an anxiety attack on stage and we saw him, he actually had to stop and try to ground himself. We would be praising him for how strong he was and the fact that he didn't run off stage. But then we see this not so pretty looking, or not so almost, for lack of a better word, like romantic looking, like mental breakdown of Kanye. It's not as pretty looking, and then we instantly think it's on a different caliber, and it's not like, and not only that, we see that, I feel like in culture too, like people are like, oh yeah, I'm just depressed today, or I'm just my anxiety's really bad. I'm like, okay, but do you know what you're saying? Like, is that actually depression? Because it is kind of like a trendy, almost trendy thing. I wouldn't be surprised if like American, what is it? Not American, Urban Outfitters or that's not even the right one. The clothing line that comes out with controversial stuff. I can't. I'm spacing on it right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they came out with a clothing line that like glamorized depression or something. You know what I mean?
Are you thinking of Anthropologie?
I might be, yeah. But yeah, like yeah, it's just unfortunate. And it's gonna sound funny, but I wish Kanye had anxiety, and I wish that was an anxiety attack on stage, because he would have been way better off right now.
Right, and there's a lot less stigma that goes around with all of that. I mean, it is interesting what you said about people not really understanding mental illness. I feel that because we're working so hard to have it not be stigmatized, everybody just feels that they can throw their input and throw their information out into, the blogosphere and the internet and TV and news and books, that now it seems that there's more misinformation out there than there is accurate information. You have people that just because you're organized, it does not mean you have OCD.
Oh, that's a big one.
Just because you get stressed in traffic does not mean you have anxiety. Everyone gets stressed in traffic. Just because you feel sad because someone in your life died or because you got in a fight doesn't mean that you have depression. It doesn't make any of those emotions or traits any less valid, but there's a difference between experiencing an emotion and dealing with a legitimate mental illness. And I feel there's been a real blurring of those lines in recent years.
Yeah. And I think my fear, obviously suffering is a given. All of us have something that we're going to go through in the world that's
absolutely
just a result of a fallen world. But I feel like the more we normalize, we're saying, OCD or depression or anxiety, I feel like if we make it seem too normal, the people who actually have it that are exhibiting symptoms are going to think, I'm actually normal and I don't need help. And so
wow, that's true.
So my fear is that we're going to water down or kind of keep away the ones that actually need the help. If I would have bought into that years ago when I started trying to seek help for anxiety, I probably wouldn't have. I'd been everyone does this and it's normal. But it's not. And so my encouragement too, to be anyone listening, if you are experiencing something that seems like that, why don't you look into it a little bit and don't write it off initially. And there's plenty of even online tests, as trivial as it may seem, but you can go on and do I have anxiety test or am I depressed test? And that's legit stuff. And you can see if it's real or not, and so you can actually get help. Because I would hate for somebody to miss out and just be sitting and suffering for no good reason, just because they think that they're normal. So,
absolutely. Well, speaking of things that are misunderstood by a lot of people, our next topic. Speaking in tongues. So we're definitely not talking about controversial things this episode. Mental illness, speaking in tongues. So most of you out there have probably heard of the Barna Group. They do a lot of really great studies, particularly related to faith and culture. So you're probably going to hear a lot about them on this podcast. The most recently released study from their State of the Church 2020 project revealed that 36% of practicing millennial Christians believe that praying in tongues is an important faith expression that either is or should be a weekly part of their worship experience. Now, this can be compared to 20% of Gen X, 14% of boomers, and 6% of elders. Now, I think it's important that we define our terms here. So Barna defines practicing Christians as self-identified Christians, including those who identify as Catholic, but excluding those who identify as Mormon or Jehovah's Witnesses. On some of their other tests and some of the other studies that they've done, they have very strict qualifications for who can be considered Christian, lists of specific things you have to believe. But for this particular study, it's a matter of self-identification. And for what they refer to as practicing Christians, you have to self-identify and you have to have attended church at least once in the last month. And they're defining millennials as those currently between the ages of 18 and 35. So that's important too, because in most generational studies, people between the ages of 18 and 22 are typically categorized as Gen Z. So for this study, it's 18 to 35.
That's good. So that, first of all, really surprised me. I was 33%.
Right?
That's a third. Well, of course. Yeah, I know math. But a third of young-ish Christians, a third of millennial Christians value speaking in tongues. I will have to preface this saying, I've kind of came from not the greatest experience with churches that embrace speaking in tongues. And I was kind of raised up in the beginning of my faith walk to believe that if you didn't speak in tongues, we're not a full Christian. And so whenever I see tongues just being brought up, I'm like, oh geez, there goes my red alert alarms. I'm
defense
like,
mechanisms.
What is it now? Yeah. But one thing, and so based off of that pessimism, I'm just going to roll with that pessimism for a second. Forgive me. But I want to know, or my question is this a sincere glossoliet? Forgive me if that's mispronounced, but that's the term for speaking in tongues in the Bible. Is this a sincere thing that's happening, or are we seeing Christians seeking a high? And what I mean by that is, I see in some of the bigger churches, I'm not going to call anyone out, but I feel like we're a very experiential culture and very like in the moment in the senses. So I want to know, like, is this one of those moments where they're actually like, the Spirit is flowing through them and they're speaking in tongues and they value that? Or is it something that they're in church, they see other people babbling, and then so they just kind of go with it because they're like, oh, I'm feeling it right now. I'm really feeling the Spirit. And so like, that's just kind of my question. Is it a legitimate tongues that we're experiencing, or is it a misunderstanding truly of what that is? Because I also see kind of like a decline in just, I guess, let's call it theological understanding in younger Christians. There's just not the same like education these days in church. So that's kind of my question. It's like, so is 1/3 of millennial Christians embracing real tongues, or is it some sensationalism?
Right. Well, and I'm wondering how many of them fully understand it and how many of them are just kind of said yes because they think they should.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Because how many of these young people are being primarily influenced by, more charismatic groups? Because we have to remember that the most popular churches and the most popular worship bands are all charismatic in their theology and practice. And so we have a lot of people that are Baptist or Presbyterian or Methodist that are listening to music and listening to sermons by people that are charismatic. And so I'm wondering how many of them actually fully understand, or how many of them were just like, oh, well, I should probably say yes. I think that's important. Because anecdotally, and this is obviously just my personal experience, I have not seen that many people up to 30% that are saying, oh yeah, speaking in tongues is super important to me. I mean, honestly, I faced a lot of kind of judgment for coming from a church that practiced speaking in tongues. I can remember being in school and we had a teacher that had to step down because he believed in speaking in tongues, and that was against our school's statement of faith, and so he couldn't teach at our school anymore. There are very strong negative feelings against speaking in tongues. And so in one way, I want to be encouraged, like, wow, there's an increased understanding. But if I take it from more of the pessimistic side, I'm like, has there really been? Because I mean, if we look around the world, the church is becoming more legitimately charismatic.
Right.
Like that's statistical fact. If we look, especially in the global South, that's statistical fact. But if we're looking at the United States specifically, it's really hard to say. And the speaking in tongues thing is interesting. I definitely have probably leaned more in that direction than you, I would say. But it's interesting because I think so much of our opinions on speaking in tongues, just in general, really come from those personal experiences and the types of people that we've been around. For a lot of people, they associate speaking in tongues and charismatic Christianity with pink wigs and gold teeth and barking like dogs and running around and acting crazy and falling out. The stream of charismaticism that my family, particularly my mom's family, has deep roots in is an incredibly intellectual strain of charismaticism, and it's a non-denominational strain of charismaticism. So there's no official group or title or anything. But I mean, my mom, when she was growing up, she had, her pastors and Bible teachers and youth pastors and teachers at her Christian schools that were extremely educated, people with PhDs in a variety of subjects, people who were psychologists, people that were theologians, people that were doctors, just people that had a great understanding of theology and also a great understanding of other aspects of the world. And she was always associated with groups that were very organized, because isn't that one of the biggest, I guess I should say, the biggest arguments against speaking in tongues is people will say, well, you're being disorderly. And so I never really had that experience because the groups that I had been a part of, that my mom and my mom's mom and all of them had been a part of, were all very orderly. Nobody was just running around screaming, acting crazy. There was a protocol and a process, and people just weren't allowed to stand up and just give any random, quote unquote
Yeah.
word from God that came to their head. You had to speak to an elder, and they prayed, and there was a lot of discernment that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say, even when looking at this study, I think we need to utilize discernment and not be too quick to get excited about it and not be too quick to be unexcited about it, but to say, okay, take it for what it is. And, I would hope to see a greater understanding of speaking in tongues, in the sense that I would hope to see less of the people that say you have to speak in tongues to be saved, and less of the people that say if you speak in tongues, you're going to hell. I think it's a part of the Christian experience, in my personal view, that you can engage with or not engage with, and whether you do or don't is more a matter of personal conviction than a matter of salvation.
Right. And I do want to note that I'm actually on the same page with you on that. While I've had
Right.
unfortunate experiences with it, I am one that has practiced that. And I do believe, like, the background, like you were saying for your mom, in the very same way, I actually wish for more of that kind of embracing of charismatic ways, to where, like you're saying, like, they didn't just jump up in church and start saying something. And then I've been in church where, like, because so in case you know or not, like, you're supposed to, one person speaks in tongues, like if it's an outward prophecy, and then another person confirms that with the translation, right? So, like, I've been in a church where, like, a guy very conveniently spoke in tongues forever and then translated himself. And that's not okay. All right. And
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, you're totally just saying what you want to say.
Yeah.
But so, like, I would love to see more of, like you're saying, like, I have a word, let me talk to an elder that's pray, I feel like the church would be more powerful for that too. Like, I think there's some great power behind all of the spiritual gifts. But there's also, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to say it, but with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, no.
Right? Like, we also need to not go a little crazy with it at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. And I think just to clarify, I believe that with the Barna study, I believe that they're speaking specifically of, for those of you that are listening that aren't aware, in the charismatic community, there are kind of two definitions of speaking in tongues.
Ooh, that's good to.
There's speaking in tongues where it's either a heavenly language or a language from another country that you don't speak natively, that you're getting up on stage and you feel that the Lord has given that to you and you're saying it on stage, and then somebody else or in front of people, and then somebody else translates it, and it's a word for the congregation or a word for a particular group. Whereas I believe that this study is speaking of what we would refer to as a prayer language, which is something that is taken from the book of Romans, where it talks about the Holy Spirit interceding with groans and utterances that man cannot comprehend. And so I believe that when they're speaking about an increase in speaking in tongues, they're speaking more about people having personal prayer languages, which might be utilized during a worship service where they're just kind of praying quietly in tongues by themselves, or it might be being utilized, maybe the people that are kind of praying in the back, or might even be utilized when you're just at home reading the Bible and praying by yourself. I mean, I know plenty of people that pray in tongues every day. I know people that pray in tongues over their meals, So
That's a good distinction to make, though,
yeah.
because that is a big difference. And for what it's worth, I honestly don't I don't side with the idea of speaking in tongues publicly during a service. I feel like,
Right.
because we're called to not bring any type of division or confusion in service. So that's just really hard to not do during a public service. But that whole speaking in tongues, like in your prayer language, I think your dad said it best. He's, it's kind of like, one way to think of it is like when you're praying and you have, like, you just don't have the words, right?
Yeah.
And you just kind of open your mouth and just speak. That's the kind of tongues that I just you get so down with. Like, and yeah, I love that. And actually, for the record, I wasn't sure which way Barna was, what like what distinction they were making. So that's a good note that you made there, with the type of tongues they're referring to.
Good to clarify those
Yeah.
things. We don't want to confuse anyone or make anyone think we're saying something we're not. And speaking of people popping off, let's talk about Eric Metaxas.
I think we need to clarify a couple things about Jesus after this.
Yes, we're definitely definitely gonna have to clarify some
Oh,
things
boy.
about Jesus. So, in a response to the United Methodist Church's announcement of a new video series they're doing with Robin DiAngelo on white privilege, author and conservative TV radio commenter Eric Metaxas tweeted the following, quote, Jesus was white. Did he have white privilege even though he was entirely without sin? Is the United Methodist Church covering that? I think it could be important. End quote.
Oh, can I just I just want to groan for a second.
Yeah.
Like that's my initial response. But first of all, what? Like, where
Just
is
what?
Where is Israel located again? Like, it's in America, right? Or it's in like Northern Europe.
Scandinavia.
I may have only completed my bachelor's degree so far, but I'm pretty sure Israel is in like the Middle East, and I'm pretty sure that there's not like stark white people there. So I think between my time as a pastor and studying theology, the only thing I can make sense of this is that maybe the blinding light of Jesus' holiness lightened his skin to the point of going from brown to white. That's all I could think of.
Yep, that's got to be it.
So we can't write off our friend Eric here, Mr. Metaxas. He could be onto something.
True. Some deep theological truths there. Oh, this whole thing is frustrating to me. Firstly, because I think just the entire conversation surrounding Jesus' skin color is ridiculous. I find it
Right.
of no consequence. I don't understand the obsession. And I just find it interesting that he's trying to say Jesus was white, because if you really want to get super, super, super technically on forms, most people that are Middle Eastern have to select white, but that's because a lot of times we take this kind of social construct of race of you can only be Asian, African, or white, and it's ridiculous because it's a social construct, but so technically, yes, Middle Eastern people would have to select white, but nobody is going to see somebody from the Middle East and be like, oh, that person's white. And that person is not acknowledged by society as white, and they live their life as a person of color. So I don't understand his argument there. And he started talking to people in the comments about like, well, is Steven Spielberg white? And I'm like, okay, well, Steven Spielberg is an Ashkenazim. He is not a Middle Eastern Jew. We look at people that identify as Jewish who appear physically to be white, but that's because of where their families settled after the diaspora.
Right.
So it has nothing to do with how did first century Jews look. And there have been studies done, not specifically on the body of Jesus, because we know his physical body was ascended to heaven, but on first century Jews. And they've done DNA tests and they've done examinations, and genetically, out of any group alive today, they're closest to modern day Jews living in Iraq. And Iraqi Jews are very darkly complected. They have dark eyes. They have dark hair. You would not see somebody that identifies as an Iraqi Jew and say, oh, that person is white. And I just think this whole conversation bothers me, because even if he was physically white, he wouldn't have had quote unquote white privilege, because at the time he was a member of the oppressed culture.
Right.
He was a Jew living in Roman occupied Judea. He was living under the Roman rule. So he would not have had any special privilege.
I think he was quite
in that regard.
the exact opposite, I would say.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. And you know, and I'm not going to get. I don't want to go too far into like. There's a whole conversation on race in America right now, but
Yeah.
I do want to leave. I do want to put this here, and at the very least, for Christians, I feel like the more we want to call white and black, the more we want to like make that distinction, we're only adding to the issue of race in America.
Yeah.
And what I mean is like, does it matter if he was white? Does it matter if he was brown? It really shouldn't. And if you're going to
No.
point out, if you're going to declare that he is white, you're part of the problem. If we want to end racism in America, how about you stop looking at race first? You know, like,
Yeah.
was Jesus a white man, a black man, a brown man? No, he was a man. And that's
That's the most
it.
important part. Yeah.
He did not say he was the son of the brown man, the son of the white man. He was the son of man. And it's just a shame that somebody that is, I kind of obviously regard as a quite amazing author. I mean, he's, I believe, a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah,
and
multiple
a Christian
times over.
would say, I mean, I'm sorry that I don't have a better way to say it, but would say something so ignorant.
Yeah, that's
It's
the
kind of
best word I
surprising.
can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, guys, we have so many other things that we can be focusing on. Can we not be posting Jesus was white or Jesus was black or Jesus was this? Let's just agree that Jesus was the Son of Man. Jesus was God incarnate, and let's just call it a day.
I think we should call it a day potentially on that.
I do. I think we're going to end up spiraling with this topic
Uh-huh.
and just be getting crazy. But I think we should kind of go into our last trending topic, which is basically our main topic for this episode, which is the church's response to COVID. And specifically, I want to talk a little bit about John MacArthur's statement. Anyone that has social media or a TV has probably heard about it. So J-Mac, as we will lovingly call him,
J-Mac.
J-Mac wrote a public statement that his church, Grace Community in Sun Valley, California, could not and would not in good conscience follow the rules Gavin Newsom put in place regarding churches not being allowed to meet in person, and that they would begin holding services in person and would continue to do so. He wrote an incredibly long statement. If I read the entire thing out loud to you, it would probably take half an hour, so I'm not going to do that. But if you want to read his entire statement, you can go to gty.org. But I'm going to give you a couple highlights, and Jordan and I are going to hash this out a bit. So MacArthur's main points were really surrounding the idea that Christ, not Caesar, meaning the state, is the head of the church. He said, God has not granted civic rulers authority over the doctrine, practice, or polity of the church. Now, it's important to note that in this, he was not arguing this on a matter of constitutional rights or freedoms, but he was arguing it from a biblical perspective. So he wasn't trying to make the argument that it's our constitutional right to be able to meet. He was trying to make the argument specifically from scriptural mandates. So there are a lot of quotes. Like I told you, this thing is really long and really in depth. Honestly, I feel that he could have shortened it a bit and made it a little easier to read. But I'm just going to leave you with two quotes that I think are going to help all of you listeners out there understand his point. He said, quote, "In short, as the church, we don't need the state's permission to serve and worship our Lord as he has commanded. The church is Christ's precious bride, 2 Corinthians 11:2 and Ephesians 5:23 through 27. She belongs to him alone. She exists by his will and serves under his authority. He will tolerate no assault on her purity and no infringement on his headship over her. All of that was established when Jesus said, quote, I will build my church and the gates of Hades will not overpower it, end quote. He also said that when officials restrict church attendance to a certain number, they attempt to impose a restriction that in principle makes it impossible for the saints to gather as the church. When officials prohibit singing in worship services, they attempt to impose a restriction that in principle makes it impossible for the people of God to obey the commands of Ephesians 5:19 and Colossians 3:16. When officials mandate distancing, they attempt to impose a restriction that in principle makes it impossible to experience the close communion between believers that is commanded in Romans 16:16, 1 Corinthians 16:20, 2 Corinthians 13:2, and 1 Thessalonians 5:26. In all those spheres, we must submit to our Lord, end quote.
Well, there's a lot. That's a lot to unpack right there.
That's a lot of stuff. So, what are your initial thoughts after hearing that and thinking about? Keep in mind, he does have a very large church. John MacArthur is an extremely popular author, preacher, theologian, I suppose. We need, as a journalist or as someone that has a degree in journalism, I believe it's important to state your biases up front. I'm gonna tell you this, and I'm gonna say it proudly. I am not the biggest fan of John MacArthur, and I'll tell you why. I am more than happy to discuss theological differences with people. I'm more than happy to discuss why I believe things are a certain way, but I am not happy to engage with those that believe that if people just read the Bible, they would agree with them, or engage with people that are very angry in their responses. I mean, we all saw him responding to Beth Moore, basically telling her that she needs to stop talking about the Bible and should just go sell jewelry on TV.
Oh my goodness.
And, you know, do I have theological disagreements with John MacArthur? Absolutely. I'll just say it now because it's going to come up a lot of times. I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not Reformed in the least, in the slightest.
That makes two of us.
Yeah, no, that's not who we are. If you are Reformed or Calvinist, we have plenty of love and respect for you and for that position. That's not where we fall. But that's not the problem that I have with him. I enjoy listening to a lot of Reformed and Calvinist speakers. I think R.C. Sproul was amazing. He was a mighty man of God, and he preached on a lot of the same things that John MacArthur does, but he did so with incredible love that I don't see that manifested in a lot of what John MacArthur does. I feel that he's very angry. His school, the Master's Seminary, has been basically has gotten in trouble from their accrediting body for creating a culture of bullying and intimidation. So I'll just say that as I'm discussing this, I do have personal issues with John MacArthur, but when I'm discussing these issues, I'm just going to be dealing with specifically this situation. I'm not going to be addressing him as a person and his motivations because we don't know what those are. Just kind of what we see in that statement, I would say.
Yeah. And that kind of, this is more in a general sense, but I really hate when churches, and he's a great example, when they make a really good point to talk about what they're against, but not what they're for. Like we get so negative and so just like, I'm at war and I'm just going to come against everything. I hate that. So I unfortunately did read through all of that, of his statement a couple times. And so I'm just going to pop off a little bit. I'm not as well put together as Mattie. She's the nice journalist, I don't even know. She's better than me. But I did.
No.
I did highlight some stuff. So first of all, I just have some questions. That's kind of the way I want to put it. I don't want to come with some big, huge argument. I just want to ask some questions. And so when he says God has not granted civic rulers authority over the doctrine, practice, or polity of the church, obviously, is that what's happening right now? So in my opinion, Gavin Newsom did not say anything about our doctrines, that we have to change doctrine. Yes, he did modify our practice a bit, but so did he modified everyone's. And I don't want to, I also want to say too that I'm not totally for the shutdowns in the way we've gone about that in California, because there's a little bit of for example, the fact that we can protest and that's okay, but we can't meet in church. So I want to make that clear. But the practice, he did not say you cannot meet outside, you cannot meet online, you need to shut it down and shut up. Didn't say that, so we've got no practice there. And then the polity, once again, he did not say anything about church government. So that's a great little statement, but I can't give it that much credit just because it again, it's kind of like that, I'm at war with Newsom and the government, in my opinion. And then later on in his article here, he says politicians may manipulate statistics, and the media can cover up or camouflage inconvenient truths. 100%. that should be a given, and I hope most of us like understand that.
Recognize that.
Like the politics and the media are not like they're not honest and clean things. There's plenty of them out there, but
Because humans are in charge of them.
yeah. Like I said before, we're all fallen, right? And so we're gonna
Yeah.
do things that are unsavory. Then he goes on to say, so a discerning church cannot passively or automatically comply if a government orders a shutdown of congregational meetings, even if the reason given is concern for public health and safety. So my question is, do you care about public health and safety, Mr. MacArthur? Because you're saying like, yeah, I see that we're concerned about keeping people safe and healthy, but we're gonna like turn around and be mad at that. And what I say is, like my church in particular, we've followed closely to our mandates and stuff. So we haven't taken it as some big attack on us when they say we have to be spaced or distanced. Like we just kind of do that. And then we're like, we can't meet inside. Well, guess what? The church is bigger than the building. We're going to meet outside, and so that's just kind of the way, I've been with that. But my other question is, does limiting attendance or restricting indoors mess with the right to assemble? Like, are we somehow not assembling if we meet at 25% capacity? Are we not assembling if we meet outside? And so I see that argument of like, we have to meet inside, period. And I'm going to touch on that for a local church here down the line on our list here. But that's my other question. I'm going quick because there's two of us here. But in going back to where I don't fully agree, like the whole like not singing during worship, that's kind of silly. Like we talk about wearing masks that they're supposed to like stop the transmission of like particles and droplets or whatever. So why don't we just sing with our masks on? That's just kind of my thought there. And finally, my last question, and I'm gonna give it to. I guess these are just kind of questions for the air. I'm not like looking for full-on answers here, unless
someone sends you back like a 20-page document, 5 pages for each question.
Here, and I'm gonna tell you, because this is my uncensored popping off podcast. If you send me 20 pages, I'm gonna read every single little bit of it, and I'm gonna break it apart like I'm doing here. So please make sure you're down there with it. But my question for this, in general, and this is kind of even like a closing question before we even close, but like, is it possible for us to stand in obedience to God, but also be in obedience to state at the same time? Because what I'm seeing here is that it's not possible. And I honestly think that it is possible. We can do our due diligence to keep our people safe, which I think we're commanded to do. Pastors are shepherds. You take care of your flock. So we can do that, but then we can also still be obedient to God and worship him. And that's just kind of my possibly unpopular opinion, depending on who you ask.
I think it's all about living within that tension, obviously. The thing that I think when I look at John MacArthur's statement, the first is that I feel that technically everything that he said is, really kind of like it's factually correct.
Right.
I'm just wondering what the heart is behind it, because they have said they are going to be distanced and practicing. Some people, if people want to wear masks, and I think they're doing like hand sanitizer and different things like that.
Yeah.
So they're acknowledging the health issues and all that, but they are still going to meet. And one of the things that he expressed, and that I've heard from a lot of people in California, was that Gavin Newsom's rulings, have changed so much. And so it's like you can meet inside, but you have to distance. Now you can't meet inside at all. Now you can't even have people in your home. Now you can't meet outside. You can only meet in your cars. And it's gone back and forth so much, and that it's seen as almost indefinite, because Newsom and many other governors are like, well, until we have a vaccine and every single person can get vaccinated, we're not going to open things back up. And that's a whole nother can of worms. But I think that's kind of where he was coming from in that. But my thought is, what is the purpose of making this huge statement and being like, here's what we're going to do, and we're so bold, and if you're not with us, basically you're not bold for Christ, and all these things? What's the point of doing that? If you feel convicted, if you feel genuinely convicted in your heart that you need to keep having your services, then just do it, and you'll face the consequences one way or the other. You know, if your local or state government decides to do anything about that, but just do it. why does it have to be this huge production is my thing. It
That's
seems that
good. Yeah.
you're worried more about your reputation and what people think about you and your church than you are, because I feel that if it was really just coming from that place of conviction, then you just do it. Why does it have to be such a huge drama?
Yeah.
You know?
It's kind of like I see that almost the same as like when people go out of their way to like they're going to give $10,000 to this family, but they're also going to make it a Hollywood production, right? Like they're going to film a video and they're going to put it on Netflix and all this. It's like, really? Did you have to make a scene? Like, just give them the money, you know?
Jesus said, do your good deeds in private.
Exactly. And so in the same kind of way, like you're saying, like, is this to cover his own butt, so to speak? Like, for lack of a better word, forgive me. Like, and to just, it seems like a waste of breath. Like, my goodness, like it took me a while. I'm a little slow, so I think it took me more than 30 minutes to read that. But yeah, like I don't even know. I could go on and on about that. Did you have any more thoughts on that? Because I want to hop into another pastor's statement here in a second.
Let's hop into this as a more general conversation.
Okay.
So moving on from John MacArthur, but just as a whole, church's response to the coronavirus.
So there is one thing I totally love is bad theology. I totally learn a lot from it. I'm totally kidding. But for the sake of being a good person, I will say it that way. I'm not going to say who or what church, but I'll say it's a large church in my area. I happened to tune in on their message last Sunday, and I'm going to read a couple things in here, and
Okay.
I got some. It just kind of made my jaw drop. So
You came with receipts.
I did. I legit went last night and I typed it out. Like I went back to the time marker and I typed it all out because I don't want to just be like one of those people in this podcast in general where we just like say a bunch of stuff, but then like you go back and like they didn't even say that, or like I want to give you the actual source to validate my opinion.
We don't want to be like the news.
But right. But he said kind of like three main things. So not three main things, but three main little sections. He said, I would love to see how much power would move if every church used their voice and said, you can't suppress us. We have a right to come in the house of God and worship him. And he went on and said, the problem with the church is we don't understand how power moves, how sound changes an environment. We have churches who are living in a dark place. When people are depressed, they go into a dark room with no sound. The churches are living in dark places. There's no sound that is happening in their church, and there is no power of God being manifested. We're good with being online. This is what, oh my goodness, made me so mad. We're good with being online because the numbers are up and the money is up, but the power of God is down. And before I move on from there, how can you, and like, this is where I start sounding like that angry talk radio kind of like thing, but like, how can you go and say our online is up, we're reaching more people than we ever have in the world. Oh, but yeah, God is weak right now. The audacity to say that.
Oh.
And we're talking about, I mean, an audience, the Facebook page of this church has 7,500 people following that page. You're going to make that statement to 7,500 people and say, like, I reached them all, but so are you saying it's you did it all on your own? God wasn't in it? If you're saying the power of God is down. It was just
you and your preaching is so good.
If you're saying the power of God is down, but your money is good and your numbers are up, are you just exalting yourself? And if that's it, I would ask you to step down or at least take a break and kind of check yourself. But it doesn't end there. It says victory has a sound to it, a sound that builds an atmosphere that allows the Spirit of God to be manifested in that moment. And if you have the right atmosphere, you can make anything happen. If we create the right atmosphere in this place, we can make anything happen because the power of God will move in the right atmosphere. When we make a church a classroom, there is no power there. I'm going to say that one more time. When we make the church a classroom, there is no power there. You can't do that. You've got to allow the Spirit to have expression in the church to create the right atmosphere. We have to create the atmosphere where the power of God can be experienced in the house of God. Wow.
See, that's new age. That is not what he's saying about the manifestations and the sound and the, like, that's not Christianity. That's 100%
Right.
New Age theology that
Right.
he's saying. That's New Age is a cult. It is a religion in itself. It's not Christianity of the what he's preaching.
Yeah,
Oh,
and that's the whole thing. I could have gone and posted the entire thing, and it was just lots of great stuff. And he went on to say, and I kind of cut off here because I was tired of typing it out, but he basically akin the church to having the right. Like we have good soil, but we don't have the right atmosphere. And in order to get that atmosphere, we have to be inside of this place. We have to be loud. We have to be big and just going back to the building. And that's rich for
yeah.
a pastor that could afford a big building. You can see it from the freeway. Like it's big. So like, God, there's so much there, and it just upset me so much. Like, you're saying that there's no, like when he said, let's make church a classroom, there's no power there. I can't begin to tell you how much God has moved in like my classrooms at Epic, like when I was in school.
Yeah.
There is absolutely power. And like, are you not learning when you're in church? Um, you know, but so first question.
If you're not
Yeah.
learning from being in church, or you're not like, the whole thing is just, it's crazy.
That's the thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
the house of God. He keeps talking with the part that got me out of all of it is where he's talking about the people of God and the house of God. And I'm like, how dare you say that God's house is only a building?
Right.
God's
Is
house
he
is
that
the
small
whole
to you?
universe. God's house is the whole universe.
I don't know
Like,
what God you're worshiping
I
because
don't-
mine's a little too big to fit in my pocket. Man.
Yeah.
Um.
Yikes.
So, like, is God then not able to move outside of the church walls? The biggest question I had, with that was, how is God able to move in the persecuted church if it's up to us only to make the right atmosphere? Like, let's look at China. Like, that's one of the biggest ones. Some of us don't get big buildings
things
to
are
worship
really bad
in.
there right now.
Like, some of us don't have buildings to worship in, let alone multi-million-dollar production setups. So
Yeah, seriously.
so like, and that's coming from somebody that loves that. Like, I love going to some of the big churches, and like, I love the production of things, and that's my job. But God 100% is not controlled or influenced by that. It only adds to the atmosphere, right? Like,
Right.
when we like when the temple was decorated back in the Old Testament, that didn't make God more powerful. That just worshipped him. It just glorified him. And so, man, I actually on purpose didn't share this with you, Mattie. Like, I have to admit, like, ahead of time, because I just wanted your like initial shock.
Which you can tell I'm like, wait, what? Like, everyone listening is just getting that.
If this was like video, you would see
initial
like all these
response.
hands flying around and everything.
Yeah.
And
Things getting knocked over.
yeah, and I just don't get it. And actually, I had no idea that this particular church held to that like New Age theology, and so it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah. That's crazy.
And yeah, it kind of left me a little bit speechless. Like, especially the numbers and money being up, but God's power being down. I don't know about you, but like, when my money has been the best, it's because of God. Like, God has blessed me. There's no amount of jobs I've been able to work or whatever just to be like, to make the amount of money or to do the amount of things that God can do without anything. Like, if I'm making sense. Like,
No, to me it's interesting because I can kind of see in some ways maybe what he's wanting to say or how people could interpret it as being good. Because if you think about it, when he's talking about the money is up and people are watching, but the power of God is down, I mean, to a point, I can understand that, because I think there are a lot of megachurch pastors that have so much money. They have millions of people following them, but they're not preaching the gospel. The reason that they have so much money and so much power and influence is because they're preaching things that people want to hear. They're tickling ears, not stirring souls. And so in that way, I understand. But then it's like he's talking about himself when he's speaking about that. And
Yeah.
so in that way, I'm like, are you just publicly admitting then that you are not preaching the gospel, or publicly admitting that you're more focused on money and influence? Because in that case, things are getting kind of very bad. I don't know. I just think it's important that we realize, the church is not a building. And as Protestants, we acknowledge that the church is not an institution. So if it's not a building and it's not an institution, what is it? The church is the universal body of believers. And we have smaller increments of that, that meet together at a certain time, that are communal, and that worship on Sundays, or that function in their communities. But the church as a whole is that universal body of believers. And so I think, even going back to the John MacArthur thing and going back to this, it's about fellowshipping with other believers. I think our biggest issue is that we have gotten stuck in the framework of what church is. Because at this point, the government has not brought down any mandates saying you cannot preach the gospel, you cannot have a Bible, you cannot in any way, shape, or form fellowship with other Christians for the purpose of religious fellowship. That has not happened. I'm not saying it won't happen. I mean, it's happening in countries all over the world, and it's happened since the beginning of the church. But at this point, that's not what's happening here. There are still plenty of ways to fellowship with other believers in order to fulfill the biblical mandate to fellowship with other believers without meeting in a physical building with 1,000 people. I mean, you think about the fact that even if you are living in a Christian home, you and your family can fellowship together and read the word and sing and pray and take communion together. If you're a single person, or even if you're not, you can get together with 2 or 3 people and go for a hike and talk about what the Lord has shown you in the word. And you can pray for one another, and you can just have that fellowship of engaging with people that believe the same way as you do. You can have fellowship with one person and go to one of the coffee shops that's still open in your area and sit and talk about the word and pray for each other and encourage one another toward love and good deeds. So at this point, we have not had the persecution in that definition of saying we cannot have Christian fellowship.
Right.
And
I might add on that too. We can do all of those things, like you're saying, while still socially distancing.
Yeah.
And we can do it distance. Like when our youth group was still we shut down for summer, we were meeting on Zoom or Google Meet. Like, that's fine too. I think there's also the older generation kind of resistance to technology, and I hate to go to that, but we think that just because something that's outside of our comfort level, because it's not comfortable, that means that it somehow is now theology, and we just can't, it doesn't count. If that makes sense, we can have powerful prayer meetings and Bible studies digitally. It's the same, honestly, in my opinion, the same as saying I don't want to go to a doctor because God's going to heal me. Well, no, God's going to heal you through the doctor, and God is going to connect us through technology. I guess that's just my opinion, but what's the alternative?
Oh, I love you, but I'm gonna have to disagree on this one. Oh, I hate it, but you're gonna hear that a lot, because I hate disagree. I hate being that person, or maybe I love it. I don't know. I believe that there is a huge place for sermons online and worship music that's put online and videos and resources. I think that's absolutely amazing. I think it's helpful. I think it's spiritually edifying. I think that we should be taking advantage of those things while we have the chance, because something that people don't really realize, and we saw this with the doctors on Capitol Hill that had their stuff scrubbed, is at any point people can decide to take your stuff off. And if the only means that you have for engaging with your local body is through the internet, I mean, it's not good, because at any point Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or YouTube or Google can flip a switch and that stuff is gone, never to be seen again. But all that said, I think it's amazing. I think it's great. But I think that there is a difference between Christian resources and genuine fellowship. Sky Jitani says online church is an oxymoron. And even John MacArthur, in his big statement, he said an ungathering church is an oxymoron. You know, the word for church, ecclesia, means gathering of the called out ones. And so without the element of incarnation, online church a lot of times is nothing more than a presentation of Christian resources. I think we so often forget that Christianity at its core is incarnational. And the reason we forget that is because we have set up a system where we go and we sit or we stand and we're all facing the same direction, so we can't see anybody around us, and it's dark and it's loud, and we either listen to people singing or we kind of try to sing along, and then we all sit down and then we all stare up in front of us, and then someone speaks at us, and then we get up and then we turn around and then we go home. And so in that case, you can do that online. But I think that's the problem. Is I think the issue is even before COVID, I don't think any of us really know. I don't think we know how to do church. And I think that's the problem, is that even before the coronavirus, we don't know how to do church. And if anything, I feel that that's what's going on right now, is that God is taking this time, revealing to all of us how we've messed up. He's trying to say, hey, take a pause, calm down, introspect, reflect, study my word, see what's going on. But instead, we're like, okay, what can we do to get our exact same model and put it back onto the internet and then just keep doing it the same we've always done? God's revealing so much to us right now. And I think so many of us are just too focused on trying to overcome the coronavirus that we're not listening to God's leading and what he's trying to reveal to all of us individually and corporately.
You know, and I do want to make the distinction. I don't see like a world where we couldn't have like a physical church like that, like you're saying, like we need to meet. And it's also like, I say the same kind of idea with when people say, oh, I'm Christian, but I don't do church. It's like,
right.
well, no, there's a fellowship that needs to happen. But I do believe kind of like in the opposite of the whole online church thing. Like my church actually considers our online presence a campus. And I think when we talk about the call to go out to all nations, I would almost argue that the internet community is another nation, in the sense that in terms of like evangelizing, had we not ever been online, there's a lot of people that never would have came. And I say that from actual evidence of like people that came to my personal church and said, I found you online. I've been listening for 2-3 months and I'm here. And so I strongly believe that there's power, and there's like, I encourage churches to embrace online, but also still meet. But the reality is like, there's some people that just aren't ready to come in. And I think like, I also don't like, like churches where like you're saying, you come in, you sit down and you leave. I think there needs to be fellowship, and like, I think, that's a little bit too, like we need to look a little bit closer in that, because there's still fellowship happening before and after, at least for the most part. Like, there's people hanging out and they're getting fellowship. And so like, I have a hard time saying like, at least in my own experience, that what we do in person isn't that whole, that I'm losing my words here, but isn't that, doesn't have power there. And,
right.
I think if we kind of treated like ourselves like robots, stood up, like stand up for worship, sit down for a message, and then beeline it to the door, then yeah, that's a problem. But I haven't seen that. And yeah, and that's what makes our podcast so beautiful, is because we do have some good, solid differences, with stuff.
Yeah, 100%. We have differences in this area. I think because a lot of really, I would say, if you add it all up, a really good portion of my Christian experience has been in churches. All of my Christian experience has been in churches that are like smaller than 50, really.
Yeah.
And majority of it has been, smaller than 30. And for many years, it was a fellowship of like 7 people. And so I've gotten, I guess we say, spoiled of going someplace and everyone knows you, and you can actually engage with people where you can hear the people around you singing and be encouraged and edified by that, where you're all singing together and everything is just very communal. And so I think in that sense I've been been spoiled. But I think that when we look at this coronavirus stuff, I have been overall very discouraged by the Christian response, because I feel that so many of us we're people of extremes, and you're gonna hear me say that a lot. You just read my mind. You're gonna hear me say that a lot. We're people of extremes, because I feel like people are either, okay, I just need to do everything the government says, and I can't even question what the government says at all, or I don't have to do what the government says. I can do whatever I want, and I'm my own boss, and nobody's gonna tell me what to do. And same thing with all of these conspiracy theories. I have been so discouraged by the Christians that have just gone straight down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Am I saying that none of these things have some type of true element to them? No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. Some of them probably do. Many of them probably do. But here's the thing. Why are we sitting around spending our time speculating on, is the coronavirus a bioweapon? Was it invented by the United States? Was it invented by China? Was it sent here on purpose? Is this some secret plot for a new one world order? Instead of doing that, spending our mental energy on that, why don't we spend our mental energy on reading the Word of God? Why don't we spend our mental energy on thinking of ways that we can serve other people, on memorizing scripture, on learning a new skill that's going to be beneficial to someone?
Yeah.
Spending that mental energy praying and meditating and fasting and seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, what do you have for me during this time? Because our world is so crazy most of the time. There are people that never see their own children because they're always at work, and then when they're not at work, their kids are in 50,000 activities. And even with Christians, we never have any time, or we have the time, we just don't set that time aside to spend with the Lord, because we say, oh, I'm too busy to have time to pray and fast or worship personally because I serve at this thing and I'm in this group and I do the 4 services on Sunday, and then I volunteer here, and I'm on the board here, and then I have my job, and then I have my blog, and then we do so much. And this is God just saying, everyone stop.
Yeah.
Stop. And we're like, but I have to keep going. And we use that mental energy, and that energy that we're so used to using on all of the 50,000 things that we have to do, we're directing it towards trying to figure out, what's this secret conspiracy behind the coronavirus? And I think that's the exact opposite of what God wants us to do right now.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, and like going back on the people of extremes, that is such a problem. Like, I mean, that's why we have denominations, because we can't see like, oh, well, we disagree here, and so it's black and white, done. But like, I think like the small church might be able to learn from the bigger ones in some of the ways they evangelize and use technology and whatever. But then at the same time, I really value, and like for like my bigger church, I wish we had that same connection that the small church does. Like
right.
I wish that I could go into my auditorium of, I don't know, 250 or whatever it is, and they all know me. That would be powerful. And that's the thing. Like, we just need to quit it with the extreme, quit it with the polarization, this black and white. One thing I learned in school it was pertaining to different cultures, in like it was actually with Dana Sudborough. You know him. But he was like, he showed the difference that it's not just right and wrong. There's a gray area called different, and different is
Yes.
okay. And I think we've forgotten that, or maybe we never knew that to begin with. But like, yeah, we can still gather and worship, and we can take precaution. We can, we can draw our lines places, but we don't have to be like, yeah, no masks and screw the government, and then, oh yeah, the government, we're gonna bow down, and I think that's one thing that bothered me with MacArthur's thing is like he took that statement of like assuming that we're just gonna bow down, and that
Right,
there's
that's
no
the
happy
only
medium.
option.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so true.
And when I've said in a number of different contexts that this virus and quarantine has brought the worst out in all of us, and it certainly has.
It really has.
And yeah, and I just think of all the time wasted. Like, let's just think, for like not even myself. I try not to take the bait, but you post an opinion about some conspiracy, and then like you spend the energy doing that. But then you spend the energy receiving like messages opposing you, and then you're fighting about that, and then all of this. And in reality, if you would have read your Bible, you would have read the part that says to avoid needless arguments.
Preach.
So I think you need to go back and read a little more, because you clearly aren't reading the Bible. You clearly aren't doing something that's actually constructive. Because at the end of the day, what are you going to do if you convince one person that the lizard people created the virus? I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
Whatever stupid thing.
Yeah.
If you convince one person, what does that get you? That makes you feel good. That is a little pat on your ego.
Yeah.
But what about the one person that didn't hear about the gospel, that just died?
Yes. Yes, we're more concerned and we're more excited. You always hear people say people are, more prone to evangelize their MLM or their new diet
Right.
than Christianity. Well, guess what? Right now, people are more excited to evangelize their particular conspiracy theory
Oh man.
than to evangelize Jesus. They're so worried about convincing everyone that Hillary Clinton is part of a satanic cabal that eats children than trying to tell people the truth that Jesus loves them and died for them and desires a relationship with them. It's mind-blowing to me. I think you need to step back and question, is Jesus really the Lord of my life if the most important thing to me is convincing people about some theory about an earthly government that has been around for 200 years and probably won't even be around for another 200 years if we look at history and how long governments are typically around.
And that's okay. And so not even talking about coronavirus deaths. Let's just go to like the CDC. This is from 2016. It says the death rate is 120 per minute. And so,
Wow.
and before I go farther, we're not called to criticize and judge the non-believer,
Right.
but we 100% need to keep each other in check, our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And so,
Yes.
let me just ask you, Mr. Christian, the 5 minutes, and I'm being real nice with that number, the 5 minutes you argued today about some stupid conspiracy theory killed 600 people. Like 600 people died in the 5 minutes you spent. And that's just America. Like, you have not been talking to one of those 600 that didn't know Christ? And I dare you to give me a good answer to that. Like,
Try to come up with a response to that, please.
But don't waste too much time.
If you have one,
right?
don't waste too much time. If you have a good response to that, send it in, and we'll read it on our next episode and let you know if we think it's important or not. Man, I think we got into some really very deep theological topics here today, talking about this response to coronavirus. And I think it's good that we did this because we're really, for those of you listening, what we've done today is set a framework and set a foundation upon which we're going to build in regards to this discussion of the coronavirus. Because on the Church Vibes podcast, we're talking about trending topics and issues and important things going on in the world through that lens of scripture and through our personal beliefs and experiences. And for the foreseeable future, the coronavirus is going to be a trending topic. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up at least in some small way in every episode for the next year.
Right.
So we, it seems kind of an intense thing to talk about right off the bat. And, I think we've scratched the surface. We've talked about so many things. But we're just setting that foundation, and we're going to build on that each week. When we're talking about things going on in the world, we'll probably say one or two things about the coronavirus and the church. But I think it's really important that we're having this conversation, because people are scared to have these conversations, because they're scared that people are going to disagree with them, and they're scared that people are going to cancel them, because cancel culture is everything right now. I think we're too busy looking at why do we have the coronavirus? What's the purpose of the coronavirus? When's it going to end? We're so focused on the coronavirus that we're forgetting and we're neglecting to take this time that God has given to so many of us to slow down. And we're neglecting to actually worry about the people that are being affected by the coronavirus. We're so worried about our churches being closed, and we're worried about our freedoms being taken away, that we're not thinking about the local business owner whose business of 30 years is closed and that's their only income. We're not thinking about those kids who live in a domestically abusive home, who are now stuck there all day. The people who are suicidal that live alone and are dealing every day with suicidal ideation. We're not worrying about the people who don't know where their next meal is coming from, the people that have lost loved ones from the coronavirus, who they themselves are fighting for their life because of the coronavirus. We're not thinking about or worrying about any of those people that are struggling, because we're too focused on our own rights. And I'll tell you this much. Jesus never, hear me when I say never, fought for his own right to do or say anything.
Man.
He didn't. But that's what we're doing.
If this mic wasn't expensive, I'd drop it. I'm sorry. I try to. My natural. I always try to bring some balance. Like, Mattie's preaching fire over here, but that's true. As much as we joke and we laugh, just my hope is that you even just take 5 minutes of something that we talked about and really, internalize that and think about it. And when it comes to like the cancel culture and that kind of like that fear, my thing is I'm so like dedicated to having a better tomorrow in terms of culture, like inside and outside of church. I'm going to take the hit for you guys. I'll say this stuff. Let me get canceled if it helps tomorrow be better. And that's kind of like my angle, my focus or whatever. So you can expect more of that. It's only going to get better from here. And man, this is some good stuff. So I think I'm going to go ahead and kind of just conclude on my end here. I actually wrote down as we were talking, don't take the bait. Like when it comes to so many different things here, just try to pause for a minute. Don't take the bait for that argument or that rabbit trail or that offense. Like, the bait of Satan is offense, right? So like, just try to slow down. And also, really ask yourself, at what point is this persecution? Am I being persecuted or have I just ran out of patience? That's what I have for you. Yeah.
That's good. That's a great question. I would encourage all of you guys listening, think about that. What I would say, what I want to leave you guys with, don't get caught up in the noise. Don't get caught up in the distraction. Live as Christ right now. Play your part in furthering the kingdom of God right now, however that may look in your situation. Participate in fellowship with other believers right now, however that may look. Whether it's having communion with your family before dinner, whether it's meeting somebody for coffee, social distanced, whether it's going outside for a hike in God's creation and talking about what he's been showing you. Follow the leading of the Holy Spirit in your life. Listen to what he is revealing to you, and everything's going to be okay.
Amen. And with that, my dear friends, I think we're going to leave you until next week. We appreciate it, especially if you lasted this long in our podcast, and we hope you come back. But yeah, we're so humbly grateful for each and every one of your listens and your follows and your likes and all of that. And you can expect to see us every Tuesday for a good long time.
Peace. Catch you on the flip.
Catch you on the flip. All right, you guys. See you next week.
Thanks for tuning into the Church Vibes podcast with Jordan and Mattie. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we'd love for you to share it with your friends and leave us a review. For additional content and to stay updated on all the latest and greatest, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Talk Church Vibes. That's at Talk Church Vibes. See you next time.